Difference between domain and domain controller. So my dear friends, let's try to understand this with an example. So for example, you take a server operating system like 2025, and on that server operating system, you install the Active Directory, full form is Active Directory Domain Service. And after installing this Active Directory Domain Service, you know what? This server is known as domain controller, DC. So domain controller is a server which has the Active Directory service installed in it. Any server is not known as a domain controller. Only the server on which the Active Directory domain service is installed, that server is known as a domain controller. Now, during this process of installation, we have to create something which is known as a domain. So domain is a logical boundary, and everything inside this boundary is controlled by the domain controller. And you have to give a name to this logical boundary. Example, Attari.com. Any name can be given depending upon your company's requirement. Here I'm taking an example of Attari.com. So just imagine the domain controller as in olden days, kings were there. Kings were having their boundaries, right? This is my area. And I am the king. Domain controller is like the king. And the domain boundary is the area of that king. The way in olden days, kings were there, and whatever is there inside their area is controlled by that king. In today's world also, kings are there in some places, some countries. So the way king used to control their area, the same way domain controller is like a king. Everything inside the domain is controlled by the domain controller. Okay. Now, what is there inside? Computers. All the company's computer will be the member of the domain. We have to join them to the domain. Then all the users of the company, they will be created in the database, which is known as the Active Directory database. All the company's users will be created here. Then what happens? When this user login, the authentication request goes to the domain controller. See, Active Directory service provides authentication and authorization. That is correct. But this Active Directory service will be installed on some server, na? So the authentication request will come to that server, and that server is known as what? A domain controller. So meaning, in short, a domain controller does authentication. It authenticates, check the username and the password in the central database. Okay, in this central database, also known as the Active Directory database. So when this user enters the username and the password, the authentication request goes to this domain controller. The domain controller is the server on which the Active Directory service is installed. The domain controller checks the username and the password. Is it correct? The user is allowed to log in. So authentication happens. Then authorization is also done by the domain controller. Authorization means we can authorize that can this user use the printer or not. Can this user install software from the computer or not? Like that, a lot of things can be authorized from the domain controller. Okay, so authentication has been done, authorization has been done by the domain controller. And domain controller is nothing but the service, the server having the Active Directory domain service. Okay, so my dear friends, I hope you got an understanding of the difference between domain and the domain controller. So whatever Active Directory service is doing, the same thing domain controller is doing. Why? Because Active Directory service is installed on the server, and that server is known as domain controller. So coming back to our interview question, a domain controller is a Windows server that runs Active Directory domain service, and it handles authentication and authorization in a domain. A domain is a logical boundary where users and computers are managed, and resources inside the domain are centrally managed by the domain controller. So my dear friends, for more information, for more practical kind of information, if you are looking for like how to do this in a practical way, we at Attari Classes, we teach live hands-on practical training. We believe in theory plus practical. So you can go to our website, that is lms.attariclasses.in, and from here you can go to the Windows Server course. There are multiple courses we teach. Okay, you can go to the Windows Server hybrid course, and you can watch the 2 free lectures which we are giving here, and you can upgrade your knowledge. Bye.